He thought he was just pouring a cup of coffee. But when a woman in a wheelchair rolled into his empty diner, wearing a faded Hell's Angels patch and eyes full of quiet storms, everything changed. By the next sunrise, 250 bikers had surrounded his building. What happened in between? It's not what you'd expect. It's not about revenge. It's about honor, and the kind of courage that rides in silence, until it doesn't. The sun had barely begun to rise over the sleepy town of Fairhaven when the rumble began. At first, it was a low, bone-deep vibration, like distant thunder rolling across the hills. A few birds scattered from power lines. Window panes trembled softly. Coffee mugs rattled on shelves. And then it grew. 1 engine, then 5, then 20, then a wave. By the time the first rays of sunlight sliced through the morning mist, the street outside Parker's diner was alive with chrome leather and steel. Harleys lined up with mechanical precision, stretching out like the spine of some roaring beast. Their riders, men and women, wore weathered jackets, patched vests, and mirrored sunglasses that reflected the sleepy shock of the town's early risers. In the distance, an American flag fluttered against the pastel sky. A single crow cawed and flew away. Inside the diner, the soft chime of the bell above the door had long been silenced by the roar. But the people still came. One by one, they walked in quiet, deliberate, respectful. No chaos, no yelling, only reverence. A few locals stared through fogged windows, jaws slack. One old man whispered, "What in God's name?" The waitress dropped her notepad. Then he stepped forward. Among the mass of leather-clad strangers, one man stood still near the diner's entrance, like a sentinel. Tall, broad-shouldered, with wind-swept hair and a worn green marine jacket that had seen its share of war zones. His name was Daniel Brooks. His stance was firm, his face calm but unreadable. A quiet fury burned just behind his eyes, controlled like a stove left on low. He didn't move, not even when the last Harley came to a purring stop beside the gas pump across the street. The town's silence collided with the weight of the moment. And then, the camera would cut. 24 hours earlier. The morning had been unremarkable, the kind that disappears from memory without a trace. Daniel was wiping down the counter at Parker's diner, the only place in Fairhaven that still played Patsy Cline before 8 a.m. His back ached, as it always did before rain. His hands, once strong enough to lift wounded men from battlefield rubble, now trembled slightly from years of labor and quietly stored grief. He glanced at the photograph on the back wall, his wife Caroline smiling under a 4th of July sky holding their daughter. That picture hadn't aged. He had. From the booth by the window, a soft wheeze reminded him of why he kept going. Daddy came a fragile voice. "Can I have the blue inhaler today? It smells better." Daniel turned. His 8-year-old daughter Lily sat with a sketchbook open on her lap, doodling a picture of a diner shaped like a castle. Her blonde hair was pulled into uneven pigtails. Her backpack rested beside her, a little too worn, a little too small. "Blue it is," he said, walking over and tapping the inhaler gently into her palm. "Just one puff." Lily nodded solemnly like a soldier receiving orders. The bell above the door jingled. Daniel looked up and everything changed. She rolled in slowly, her wheels gliding across the black and white checkered floor. A battered leather jacket hung off her slim shoulders. Her jeans were torn at the knee, and a flash of something fierce flickered beneath the strands of raven black hair. But it was the tattoo that caught the light. A crimson-winged angel spanned the length of her arm, bold against the pale skin, glowing almost unnaturally under the sun, spilling through the diner's front window. Daniel wasn't the only one who noticed. The room fell silent. Behind the counter, the coffee pot hissed. She parked near the corner booth and adjusted the brake on her wheelchair, like she'd done it 1,000 times. Fast, deliberate, no fanfare. A hospital wristband peeked from beneath her sleeve. Daniel approached slowly. Not out of pity. Out of curiosity. "You want a coffee, ma'am?" She didn't look up. "Depends. You serve judgment with it?" Daniel smiled. "Not since my second tour." That earned a glance. Her eyes were piercing green eyes that had seen things and remembered all of them. She nodded once. Black. He poured it without asking for payment. She didn't offer one. As he set the cup on her table, their fingers nearly touched. He felt the tremble. Not fear. Fatigue. She was running on something thinner than caffeine, maybe desperation, maybe duty. Before he could speak again, she whispered, "Thanks." And then the bell jingled again. 2 men walked in. Deputies. Local. One short and smug, the other tall and silent. Their badges caught the morning light, but their eyes stayed cold. Daniel knew them. Everyone in Fairhaven did. The shorter one, Brennan, scanned the room like a wolf who smelled blood. His gaze locked on the woman in the wheelchair. Well, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Didn't know we were letting that kind in today." The diner froze. Daniel's jaw clenched. Lily looked up from her sketchbook confused. And from her corner, the woman in the chair didn't move. She didn't fight. She didn't flinch. But Daniel did. He stepped forward slowly, wiping his hands on his apron. The hum of tension in the air was louder than any Harley. The man who had once carried wounded friends through enemy fire now stood in a tiny diner with a rags in his hand and the eyes of a warrior rising in his chest. And outside, the storm of engines was still a day away. The rain didn't fall, but the sky looked like it wanted to. Clouds hung low over Fairhaven, painting the town in shades of gray and sepia. A fine mist clung to the edges of windows like breath on glass. Somewhere down the block, an old radio crackled out Patsy Cline again, this time from a truck bed, not a jukebox. Inside Parker's diner, Daniel Brooks stood alone behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, polishing the chrome napkin holders for the 3rd time that morning. He wasn't really cleaning. He was thinking counting, really. 3 overdue supplier bills, 1 property tax notice, 2 past due medical invoices from Lily's last asthma attack, and a big red sticker on the walk-in freezer's compressor. The math didn't lie, and the margins didn't bend. He sighed, folded the cloth, and looked up at the specials chalkboard. The word pie had been misspelled since Tuesday. He didn't bother fixing it. Behind him, the old ceiling fan hummed and swayed slightly more out of habit than function. The diner had once been his father's dream, a 1950s-style roadside stop with milkshake fountains, leather booths, and red tile floors. Soldiers, bikers, truckers, even a few politicians had passed through these doors over the decades. Daniel remembered sitting on a booster seat at the back table, watching his father flip burgers, while his mother poured coffee with a smile so wide it lit up the walls. That smile was long gone now. Cancer had taken her slow. War had taken him faster. And Daniel, he had gone off to war a boy and come back a man with hands too calloused to hold anything tender. He looked around at the emptiness. Only 2 tables were occupied, an old couple nursing half-eaten pancakes and a man with a laptop who hadn't ordered in an hour. Dead again, came a voice. Daniel turned. Behind him stood Alma, the part-time waitress, who only came in on weekdays, and only when her knees didn't act up. "I can handle it," Daniel said. "You always say that," she replied, tying her apron with practiced slowness. "One day, you're gonna drop dead over that grill, and this place'll still owe more than it's worth." He didn't argue. Alma had earned the right to speak freely. She'd helped his parents build this place. She'd watched Caroline walk in for her first date. She'd held Lily the day she was born. "You still thinking of selling?" she asked quietly. Daniel glanced at the rusted "For Sale" sign tucked behind the back door. Thinking, he said. Thinking. Always thinking. Never deciding. Because what was he without this place? Without the grill, the floors, the corner table where Caroline used to doodle menu designs. Where else could he protect Lily and still feel like he was protecting something of his father? He walked to the register, opened the drawer, and counted exactly $38. That would barely cover a tank of gas, let alone payroll. The door chimed. Lily skipped in with a backpack, half her size, trailing mist and pine needles from the walk through the woods behind their small cabin. "Dad," she said brightly, "Miss Jordan says I might win the art contest." Daniel's face lit up for the first time all morning. That, so he said, kneeling to unzip her coat. "Yep, but we need crayons. The good ones. The ones that don't break when you press." He nodded, kissed the top of her head and said, "Then we'll get the good ones, even if it meant skipping dinner." Lily pulled out her sketchbook and flopped into the booth by the window, her head already bent over another masterpiece. This one looked like a diner in space. Daniel returned behind the counter and turned on the old radio. Patsy was replaced by Merle Haggard. The sound crackled, but it filled the silence. "Your dad ever tell you why he built this place?" Alma asked after a moment. Daniel shook his head. Said he wanted a place where soldiers, saints, and sinners could all sit down and eat the same pie. She said, her voice far away. Said America needed more tables like that. Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe he was right," he replied. Alma reached out, squeezed his arm gently, then went to wipe down the window near Lily's booth. Just then, a gust of wind rattled the front door, and a feeling crept in. That strange pull in the chest, the kind of premonition a soldier knows too well, a tightening behind the ribs. Daniel turned and looked out the window. Nothing there. Just mist and pine and silence. But something was coming. He could feel it, and it would change everything. The bell above the door jingled a soft chime against the low murmur of country radio. Daniel Brooks didn't look up right away. His hands were busy rinsing out the syrup tray, his mind half listening to Lily humming in the corner booth. He figured it was another regular, the mailman, or maybe Joe from the barber shop. But the diner didn't go quiet for just anyone. Silence, like the kind that swallows a room whole, rolled in like a wave. Daniel froze. He looked up, and time paused. The woman wheeled herself through the doorway slowly but not timidly. Her entrance carried no apology. The narrow tires of her wheelchair whispered across the tile floor, each turn of her hands deliberate. Her boots were scuffed, laces frayed, but they belonged to a traveler. Her leather jacket was worn to a soft gray, at the elbows, cracked at the shoulders. Well-loved, not neglected. She was maybe late 30s, though her eyes carried a weight far older. Eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little. Jet black hair fell past her shoulders, slightly tangled like she hadn't slept much. She wore no makeup, no jewelry. But there was one thing that shimmered in the soft yellow morning light, a tattoo. A crimson-winged angel curled around her upper arm, bursting into view from beneath her jacket sleeve. Its feathers flared across her skin like a fire, frozen in flight, intricate and vibrant against the pale canvas of her arm. The Hell's Angels patch on her chest was faded, stitched over, and half covered by a medical bracelet. But no one missed it. Lily stopped humming. Alma's cloth stalled on the counter. And Daniel just stood there, a sponge dripping in his hand, the scent of syrup and stainless steel suddenly irrelevant. The woman glanced around. Slowly. Calculated. Like she'd memorized the exits before she even crossed the parking lot. Her eyes flicked to the booths, then to Daniel. They didn't hold anger or fear. They held distance. Walls. She turned her wheels and made for the far corner of the diner, the booth closest to the back window, where the morning sun filtered through lace curtains and dust motes danced like ghosts. The entire town of Fairhaven might have held its breath in that moment. She parked with expert grace, pulled her jacket tighter around her, and adjusted the brake. Then she just sat, silent, still, eyes locked on nothing and everything at once. Daniel finally moved. He washed his hands, wiped them dry, and walked over slowly, calmly. Not cautious, not curious, just respectful. When he reached her booth, he offered a simple nod and said, "Morning." "Coffee?" She didn't look up, just said black. He didn't push. He returned moments later, placed the cup gently on the table, and slid over a small metal creamer, without asking. She didn't touch it. "You passin' through?" he asked, voice even. She stirred the coffee slowly, then said, "Not sure yet." Her voice was husky, low, and frayed at the edges. It carried the echo of midnight highways and hospital hallways. A voice that had once shouted above roaring engines and now barely spoke above a whisper. Daniel caught a glimpse of the hospital bracelet again as she lifted the cup, white plastic bent slightly with faded print. Her hands trembled just barely. He didn't stare, didn't ask. But he noticed. He always noticed the little things. It came with being a father, a soldier, a widower. "You want breakfast?" he asked. She shook her head. Daniel nodded, then turned to walk away. But just as he reached the counter, she spoke again, quiet, as if unsure why the words even left her mouth. "You the owner?" He turned. "Yes, ma'am." "You served?" she asked. Daniel hesitated only a breath before replying. "Marines, Iraq, 2 tours." She nodded. "My brother did 3. There was something final in her tone, like she didn't want to talk about him. Or maybe couldn't. Daniel didn't press. He just replied, "He's welcome here any time." She didn't smile, but something softened in her shoulders. A few more minutes passed. Then Alma leaned in behind the counter and whispered, "You see the patch?" Daniel didn't answer. "She's a Hell's Angel," Alma added, her voice lower, now conspiratorial. "She's a person," Daniel replied, never breaking his gaze from the coffee pot. Alma pulled back with a raised brow, but said nothing more. Across the room, Lily was now drawing again, quiet, but glancing up at the woman every few minutes, with a look of curiosity only children could get away with. And the woman noticed. She looked at the little girl, with eyes that seemed for just a second, tired beyond measure. Her hand reached up instinctively toward the medical bracelet, then stopped midway, dropping gently to her lap. Daniel returned with a fresh pot. "This one's on the house," he said. She looked up, directly into his eyes. Why, she asked, wary. Daniel shrugged. "You look like someone who's been carrying too much for too long." Her lips parted as if to say something, but nothing came out. Instead, she nodded once and said, "Raven." "My name's Raven." Daniel smiled faintly. "Daniel. That little one over there is Lily." Raven looked at the girl again. A long moment passed. "She's got your eyes," Raven said quietly. Daniel's smile faded into something deeper, something private. "Yeah," he replied. "She's got my late wife's fire, though." Raven didn't respond. But for the first time since she'd entered the diner, her gaze rested not on the exits, not on the door, not on her coffee, but on Daniel. Something passed between them. Not flirtation, not friendship, just recognition. 2 people on different roads who had both learned how to carry things no one else could see. The coffee had gone lukewarm, but neither of them seemed to notice. Outside, the morning fog had begun to lift from the pine trees that lined the hills beyond Fairhaven, letting slivers of golden light pierce through the diner's windows. Dust motes danced in the beams like old spirits returning home. The soft hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Raven Hart sat alone at her corner booth, both hands cupped around the ceramic mug like it was the only warm thing she trusted. Daniel Brooks watched from behind the counter. He wasn't staring. He was observing the way a man observes weather coming in from the distance, quietly, attentively, with respect. He had seen all types pass through Parker's diner. Drifters, ex-cons, rich couples from the city pretending they liked real food bikers, from weekend rallies, veterans who drank black coffee like it was holy water. But Raven, she didn't move like someone passing through. She moved like someone who'd run out of places to go. Daniel turned to the griddle, cracked 2 eggs into a pan, and dropped a few strips of bacon beside them. He didn't ask her if she wanted breakfast. He just started cooking. A few minutes later, he approached her booth and gently set down the plate. "You didn't order." "This," Raven said flatly. "I know," Daniel replied. "But you look like someone who skips breakfast on principle." Raven glanced down at the plate, crispy bacon, 2 eggs over medium buttered toast, and a slice of tomato on the side. "Looks like someone's mother taught him well," she muttered. Daniel smiled faintly. "She did. And my wife made sure I didn't forget." Raven's expression didn't change, but she picked up the toast and took a careful bite. She chewed slowly, swallowed hard. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was shared. Daniel sat across from her, not too close, just far enough to give her space. He folded his hands on the table, palms down like a man who wasn't trying to impress anyone. His forearms were strong, lined with sun and scars. His marine tattoo, half faded under the cuff of his sleeve, peeked out as he leaned forward. "You don't talk much," Raven said between bites. "Neither do you," Daniel replied. Raven smirked. "Guess that makes us a perfect match for nothing." Daniel chuckled quietly. Or maybe just the perfect match for coffee and silence. For a moment, her face softened just barely. Her defenses didn't drop, but they shifted. Her walls weren't made of steel. They were made of fatigue. She placed her fork down and took a breath. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "I didn't think you were," Daniel said. "I know what people see when I roll in. The patch, the wheels, the ink. They make assumptions." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "You ever notice that the ones making the most noise usually carry the least weight?" She blinked at him, then nodded. "Yeah, I've noticed." He waited a beat, then asked, "You headed somewhere?" Raven hesitated, then answered, "I'm on my way to see my mom. She's not doing great. Hospital in Huntsville. Had a bad fall last week. Already had some underlying issues. They called me yesterday. Said I should come." Daniel listened without flinching. Didn't want to stay at a hotel, she continued. Didn't have the money anyway. Slept in the van last night at a rest stop. Woke up with pins and needles. Couldn't feel my legs for 10 minutes. Figured I'd find coffee, maybe a warm place to breathe. "You found both," Daniel said simply. She looked up at him again, and for the first time since she entered that diner, Raven's voice dropped to something vulnerable. Not weak, just human. "I hate feeling like I'm a burden," she said. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He slid something across the table, a small laminated card. Faded. Edges worn. Raven picked it up. Read it silently. U.S. Marine Corps. Ethos. Honor. Courage. Commitment. "That was in my pocket the day I carried my buddy out of Fallujah," Daniel said. "He weighed 220 pounds, and I hadn't slept in 36 hours. I didn't feel like a burden then. He didn't feel like one either." Raven held the card between her fingers, then carefully slid it back across the table. "You're not here because you need help," Daniel added. "You're here because you still keep going." Her eyes brimmed, not tears, not yet, but that shimmer people get when they haven't heard kindness in a while. Before she could answer, Lily's voice floated over from the booth behind them. Daddy Daniel turned. "Yes, sweetheart. Does she like purple?" Daniel looked at Raven, then back to Lily. "I think she might." Lily walked over shyly, holding a page from her sketchbook. On it was a cartoonish motorcycle with wings and flames, drawn in messy but heartfelt strokes of purple crayon. "It's for you," she said to Raven. "Because you have fire wings." Raven blinked, hard. She took the picture, slowly holding it like it might disappear. "Thank you," she whispered, and for the first time she smiled. It wasn't big, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. The sound of tires crunching gravel outside broke the stillness inside the diner. Daniel's hand paused mid-wipe across the counter. Raven lowered her coffee cup without a word. Even Lily, usually lost in her world of crayons and dragons, looked up as the low hum of an idling engine rumbled into place just beyond the window. A Fairhaven County Sheriff's cruiser. White paint, blue striped door emblem faded by sun and time. Two silhouettes sat inside. Daniel didn't need to see their faces to know who they were. He gave the counter one final swipe and folded the cloth with precision, his body shifting just slightly. Subtle, practiced, not defensive, just prepared. The cruiser door opened with a familiar metallic creak. Boots hit pavement. The diner door swung open and a gust of cold air followed. Deputy Brennan stepped in first. Stocky. Buzz cut. The kind of man who chewed toothpicks when he wasn't chewing people out. His tan uniform was crisp, but the tilt of his belt holster hinted at vanity. He walked like the room already belonged to him. Behind him trailed Deputy Taylor, younger, taller, with the nervous energy of a rookie, still learning where his authority began and ended. His eyes darted between booths, as if expecting something to jump out. Neither man said a word at first. The bell above the door jingled once, then faded into silence. Daniel straightened slowly. "Morning, Brennan." "Taylor." Brennan gave a slow, deliberate nod. His eyes scanned the room not for threats, but for reasons. Reasons to assert something. Anything. Then he saw her. Raven, her leather jacket, the crimson wings inked across her skin, the wheelchair, the presence. Brennan's jaw clenched just slightly. "Well," he said, voice loud enough to carry. "Ain't this something?" Raven didn't move. She didn't flinch. But Daniel saw it the way her fingers curled just a little tighter around her cup. She had been through worse. That much was obvious. But she also knew how this went, and how fast it could go wrong. Brennan stepped closer, tapping a finger casually on his belt. Didn't realize Parker's Diner was holding open house for the Hells Angels these days. Daniel didn't smile. "She's a customer," he said. Calm. Even. "She got ID?" Brennan asked, turning his gaze to Raven. "We've had reports of an Angel chapter passing through. Some folks get nervous, you know." Taylor hovered near the jukebox, clearly unsure whether to speak or vanish into the wallpaper. Daniel didn't move from behind the counter. His voice dropped just slightly, a degree firmer, but still polite. "She's not causing any trouble. Just having breakfast." Brennan smirked. "You vet every biker who comes in, or just the ones in wheelchairs?" Raven finally spoke. Her voice cut through the room like steel softened by rain. "You want my ID, officer?" Deputy Brennan corrected. She gave him a long, measured look. "Right." "Deputy." Then, with deliberate calm, she reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and pulled out a battered wallet. Her fingers weren't shaking, but they weren't steady either. She extended the ID toward him. Brennan didn't take it. Instead, he glanced at Daniel. "You vouching for her?" Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting both hands on the counter, palms flat. His voice was low, but there was weight behind it now. "I'm saying she's a guest, And she's under my protection." The room fell still. Even the hum of the old refrigerator seemed to take a breath. A sliver of morning sunlight streamed through the diner window, cutting a halo-like glow around Daniel's shoulders. His marine jacket caught the light, its faded patch, its frayed seams, the history sewn into every thread. Brennan's eyes flicked toward it. A flicker of something passed across his face. Disdain, recognition. It vanished too quickly to tell. "You still waving that flag, huh?" Brennan said. "Lot of good it's done you." Daniel's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "My service taught me to defend what's right," he said. "Not to bow to fear." Brennan didn't like that. You could see it in the way his jaw locked, in the way his thumb shifted toward the edge of his duty belt. Raven set her ID down on the table. Slowly. "If this is about who I ride with," she said, "then you're gonna need a bigger squad car." Brennan took one step forward. "Watch yourself," he warned. Taylor spoke up suddenly. We should go. It's not worth." Brennan shot him a look that iced the air between them. Then he turned back to Daniel, leaned in just a hair too close, and said quietly, "You always did have a soft spot for strays." Daniel didn't blink. Brennan straightened. He looked around the room at Lily, who sat clutching her sketchbook, at Alma, frozen with a coffee pot in her hand. Then he walked out. Taylor followed, shoulders tense. The door jingled once more and closed behind them. Silence. Daniel exhaled slowly, not realizing until that moment he'd been holding the breath. He glanced at Raven, who sat like stone, though her knuckles had gone white. "You all right?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "Then I've had worse." Lily's voice came from behind the booth. Daddy Daniel turned. "Are they coming back?" He forced a small smile. "Not today." But he wasn't sure. Outside, the cruiser lingered in the lot for a moment, before rolling away down Main Street. And inside, something unspoken had settled between Daniel and Raven. A line had been drawn. A choice had been made. The wind picked up as the cruiser disappeared down Main Street, swirling a fine veil of dust along the sidewalk, like the tail of a departing storm. Inside the diner, no one moved for a long moment. The air hung thick with silence, not the kind that begged for words, but the kind that asked you to sit still and feel what had just passed through. Daniel Brooks finally turned away from the window and set the coffee pot back on its warmer. The hum of the old refrigerator resumed. The eggs on the griddle hissed as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. At her booth, Raven adjusted the brake on her wheelchair, her jaw tight. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Daniel didn't speak either. He simply poured her a fresh cup of coffee and set it gently on the table, careful not to disturb the folded ID she'd left behind. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. "I've had cops get rough," Raven said. "I've had cuffs cut off my circulation. I've had nights where the only thing keeping me from losing it was the fact that I could still feel my knuckles." Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the cup. "But I've never had anyone stand between me and a badge," she finished. "Not like that." Daniel shrugged lightly as if it was nothing. It was the right thing to do. She looked up. That's rare these days. He didn't reply, just sipped his own coffee, eyes distant for a second, back in some place far from the warmth of the diner. A desert, maybe. A battlefield. A hospital corridor. Then he came back. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I didn't do it for a thank you." "I know," Raven said. "That's what makes it harder to take in." From behind the counter, Alma cleared her throat softly. "You want me to hang the closed sign?" Daniel shook his head. "Not yet." "Could be a long day after this," she warned. "Could be," he said. She didn't argue. Alma knew him too well. Lily, still sitting quietly at her corner booth, pulled her sketchbook back into her lap. She wasn't drawing this time. She was watching. Carefully. Raven followed her gaze, then turned back to Daniel. "She's sharp," she said. "Observant." Daniel smiled faintly. Takes after her mom. Raven paused, reading the weight behind his words. I figured, you're not just a widower. You're still carrying her. Daniel didn't flinch. Some things you don't set down. You just learn to walk with them. Raven nodded. I lost someone too, she said. Brother. Navy. Younger than me by 2 years. He made it back, but left too much of himself behind. Wasn't the IED that killed him. It was the silence. Daniel's eyes met hers. That look of shared understanding. The kind that doesn't require explanation or small talk. Only presence. Raven swallowed hard and added, this life. The chair. The colors on my back, it all came after. When you lose something that was part of your blood, you start looking for new family. Not all of them are clean. Not all of them are safe. But they show up. Daniel studied her. I'm guessing you've shown up for them too. She nodded. When the wheels still let me. They both smiled small, real weathered smiles. Then Raven's eyes darkened slightly. That cop, she said. He won't forget today. No, Daniel agreed, but neither will the folks who were watching. Raven glanced around. The old couple had left. The laptop guy had vanished. Only Alma and Lily remained. But who's on your side? She asked. Because I've seen what happens when towns pick sides. Daniel leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. Voice steady. Sometimes, he said, a man doesn't take a side because it's safe. He takes it because he can't sleep if he doesn't. Raven blinked. The air felt heavy again, but this time it wasn't tension. It was truth. A quiet kind of truth, the kind that binds two souls, not with romance, but with recognition. Just then, the bell over the door jingled again. Daniel stood quickly, muscles tensing. But it was only old Mr. Jarvis, the town's retired mechanic, holding a bag of mail and a half-eaten apple fritter. Morning, son, he said casually. Heard Brennan was sniffing around here earlier. Daniel nodded. He came through. Jarvis looked at Raven, then back to Daniel. Good, he said. Maybe it's time someone reminded him that this town ain't his backyard. Daniel raised a brow. You were watching. Jarvis shrugged. Small town. Windows talk. Raven gave a soft chuckle. Thanks, Mr. Jarvis, Daniel said sincerely. Jarvis tipped his cap to Raven. Miss. And then he left. Raven looked down at her coffee again, her voice quiet. Maybe it's not just me who doesn't want to feel invisible anymore. Daniel tilted his head. Maybe. Another long pause. Then softly, you're welcome to stay, as long as you need. Raven looked up, something unsteady flashing in her eyes, a test of trust. Even if the badge comes back, Daniel didn't blink, especially then. She exhaled slowly. Then maybe I'll take that second cup after all. By morning, the message was loud and clear. Spray-painted in crude, angry letters across the side window of Parker's diner were the words, No Biker Lovers. The red paint bled down the glass like fresh rust, dripping over the lace curtains that Caroline had once sewn by hand, the kind of curtains that made the place feel like home. Daniel stood outside in the cold coffee mug in hand, staring at the words, as if reading a language he'd once forgotten how to speak. Lily clutched the hem of his jacket, her eyes wide. Daddy, she whispered. I know, he said, gently moving his hand to shield her view. Go inside, sweetheart. She obeyed without protest. Even at 8 years old, she understood more than he wished she did. Inside, Alma stood by the register with her arms crossed, jaw clenched. Cowards, she muttered. Daniel didn't disagree, but he didn't waste his breath saying it out loud either. With a quiet sigh, he set down his mug, grabbed a wet cloth and a bucket, and stepped back out into the morning frost. The paint was fresh. Too fresh. The kind that still clung to the pores of the glass, daring him to erase it. He worked in silence, scrubbed without flinching. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to intimidate him. It likely wouldn't be the last. But this time the pain didn't come from the slur. It came from what followed. By 8:20 a.m., no one showed up for breakfast. Not the old couple who came every Thursday for the early bird special. Not the high school janitor who always ordered a ham sandwich to go. Not even Joe from the barbershop, who once called Daniel the best damn hash slinger west of the Mississippi. The chairs remained empty. The syrup stayed warm. The register silent. By 9:30, Daniel had flipped the open sign to closed, not because the diner was closed, but because the town had already closed itself off. Raven offered to leave. She sat quietly at her usual booth, a black hoodie pulled over her arms, wheelchair angled slightly toward the window. "I didn't mean for this," she said softly. Daniel looked up from the mop he was pushing across the floor. "You didn't do this," her voice was low. "They'll keep coming." Daniel rinsed the mop and replied, "So will the sunrise. Doesn't mean I stop making breakfast." Raven looked away, jaw working. She wasn't used to kindness that stayed even after the damage had been done. Alma pulled Daniel aside around noon. "You know I'm with you," she said. "But I gotta be honest, most folks around here, they pick comfort over conviction." Daniel nodded. He knew. "But I'm not going anywhere," Alma added. "I never thought you would," he replied. Still, as the hours passed and the diner stayed empty, the weight began to creep in. Daniel busied himself with maintenance, fixed the flickering light above booth 3, tightened the loose leg on table 6, repainted the menu board, even added a new item. Freedom fries, $2.25, no side of judgment included. But it was Lily's voice that finally cracked him open. "Daddy, are we gonna have to move again?" Daniel looked up from the sink where he was rinsing glasses. She stood there in her socked feet, holding her dragon plushie. Her voice was quiet, her face brave. But her eyes shimmered with fear no child should carry. He dried his hands and knelt down. "No, baby," he said, smoothing her hair. "We're not moving." "But what if the people don't come back?" He paused. "Then maybe," he said, "we find new people." She didn't seem convinced. Neither was he. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep on a booth cushion with her sketchbook over her chest, Daniel stood alone at the counter. The lights dimmed the air heavy. He pulled out an old wooden box from beneath the register. Inside were the last physical remnants of his past life. A wedding ring, a bronze star, a folded American flag, and a yellowed letter written in his wife's careful script. "No matter what happens, promise me you'll never let the world make you hard." His fingers lingered on the edge of the letter. He almost didn't hear the door open, but he looked up and saw her. Raven. Only now she wasn't wearing her leather jacket. She wore a plain black flannel shirt. No patches, no gloves. Just a woman sitting in a wheelchair carrying nothing but honesty. "I'll leave tomorrow," she said. Daniel said nothing. "I don't want you losing this place because of me." "You think that sign outside changed who I am?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "No. But I think it's starting to change how this town sees you." Daniel stepped forward. "Then maybe it's time this town sees a little clearer." She looked up, her voice just above a whisper. "You'd do that risk everything I already did." A long silence passed between them. Then Raven said something she hadn't said to anyone in years. "Thank you." Daniel nodded, and for the first time that day, he smiled. The next morning, Fairhaven woke to stillness. No wind, no birdsong, no breakfast chatter from the corner lot, just the kind of hush that settles over a place waiting for something it can't name. Inside Parker's diner, the smell of fresh coffee lingered, but the booths remained empty again. Daniel Brooks stood behind the counter, eyes scanning the familiar stretch of polished wood grain, as if he might find answers hidden in its knots. His hands moved without thought, restocking napkins, flipping over salt shakers, wiping down menus that no one had touched in days. The only sound came from Lily, humming quietly in the corner, drawing with her purple crayon. She hadn't asked for pancakes that morning. She hadn't asked for much at all. "Daddy," she said, not looking up. "Why don't they come anymore?" Daniel paused mid-wipe. He didn't want to lie, but he also didn't want her to carry the bitterness the world so freely handed to grown men. "They forgot how to be brave," he said softly. Lily frowned at her drawing. "But you didn't." Daniel smiled, a small one, the kind that flickers and vanishes before it settles too long. Alma entered through the back door, carrying a paper bag. "Brought apple fritters," she said, placing them on the counter. "No charge," Jarvis insisted. Daniel raised a brow. He said the town may be scared, but it ain't stupid. Daniel chuckled. "Remind me to thank him." "You can," Alma replied. "He's out front repainting the window." Daniel blinked. "Seriously, white paint? Clean slate." "Said you earned it." Daniel turned to look through the blinds. Sure enough, there was Jarvis on a folding ladder, gray coveralls zipped to the neck, whistling an off-key version of "This Land Is Your Land," while brushing over the red graffiti with slow, deliberate strokes. Maybe Alma said it's not about who shows up first, but who comes back anyway. Daniel nodded slowly. Behind him, the bell above the door jingled. Raven rolled in, bundled in a weathered denim jacket over a thermal shirt sleeves, pushed up just enough to show the edge of her tattoo. Her face was flushed from the cold eyes sharp. "Morning," she said more naturally than usual. Daniel gestured to the coffee pot. "Seats warm." Raven smirked. "Chair's got its own heating system." She rolled to her booth, locked the brakes, and set a folded piece of paper on the table. Daniel poured her a cup. "What's that hospital update?" she said. "Mom's stable, breathing better. They think she'll turn a corner this week." Daniel smiled. "That's good news." "First I've had in a while," Raven said. They sat in silence for a moment. Lily came over with her latest drawing. This one showed Raven in her wheelchair, with a cape flowing behind her and a giant eagle overhead. "You gave me wings again," Raven whispered. Lily nodded solemnly. "Because you protect people too." Raven touched the edge of the page, then looked at Daniel. "She's something special." "She is," he agreed. Then Raven turned her gaze out the window. "You ever wonder what comes next?" she asked. Daniel followed her eyes out past the trees, past the sleepy town, into the roads that disappeared into cold horizon. "Sometimes," he said. "But I've learned not to outrun the moment I'm in." Raven nodded. A pause. Then she asked, "You ever miss it?" "The course, yeah." Daniel took a breath, leaned back slightly. His eyes drifted to the shadow box on the wall, Caroline's display of his medals, his stripes, the folded flag she insisted be hung by the window where the light hit it at noon. "I miss the clarity," he said. "You knew your mission. You knew the rules. You knew who had your back." Raven's eyes lowered. "And now?" "Now," he shrugged. "The missions are smaller, but maybe they matter more." She stared at him for a long time, as if seeing something no one else had noticed. "You don't flinch," she said. "I've done enough of that," he replied. Just then the door creaked open again. Jarvis stepped in, rubbing his hands. "Window's clean," he said. "Town ain't." He tossed a set of bills on the counter. Daniel frowned. "What's this? 2 breakfasts. One for me, one for whoever needs it next. You're not running a charity, Brooks, but maybe the rest of us can help." Daniel looked at the money, crumpled, but warm. Alma grinned from the kitchen. "Might want to fry more bacon." Daniel chuckled, but outside, just beyond the sound of laughter, something stirred. A faint hum, barely audible at first. A distant rumble, too steady to be thunder, too low to be a truck. It came from far down the road, like the earth itself was clearing its throat. Raven froze. Daniel tilted his head. And Lily whispered, "Daddy, is that thunder?" He listened, then looked at Raven. She was already rolling toward the window, her eyes scanning the horizon. Her voice came low. "Sure," almost reverent. "No," she said. "That's family. It started as a vibration. Not a sound, not a movement, just a faint trembling underfoot, like the diner's old wooden floorboards had suddenly remembered something from long ago. Lily felt it first. She looked up from her drawing, eyes wide. Her crayon rolled off the table and onto the tile with a soft click. "Daddy," she whispered. "Is that—" Daniel didn't answer right away. He stood behind the counter, mug in hand, eyes narrowing toward the window. The air had changed. The silence outside had been replaced with a pressure subtle, but growing like the moment just before a storm breaks. Raven had already rolled halfway to the door. Her shoulders were square, her eyes scanning the horizon like a soldier tracking coordinates. "Is it them?" Daniel asked. She didn't reply. Not yet. Then the first sound broke through, low and primal, the unmistakable rumble of a Harley engine. Then another. Then 10. Then 30. Then something bigger. A chorus of chrome and thunder, deep and rolling, spilled over the hills surrounding Fairhaven like a freight train dipped in gasoline and loyalty. Jarvis stepped out of his truck across the street and took off his cap, blinking into the morning light. Alma leaned against the diner window, her mouth half open. "I'll be damned." And Raven closed her eyes just for a second and breathed in like she was coming home. Daniel walked around the counter and joined her at the door. Lily clung to his leg, peeking between the folds of his jacket. Out on the horizon, the first wave appeared. They came not in chaos, but in reverent formation, 2 wide, perfectly spaced rows of roaring Harleys. Riders dressed in leather, denim, flannel, and chrome. Veterans, brothers, sisters. People who'd ridden hard and lived harder. Their headlights pierced the mist like a procession of fireflies returning to land. And they kept coming. From state lines and desert roads, from city outskirts and truck stops. Some wore patches from Alabama, some from Nevada. One bore the insignia of a California chapter with a red feather sewn just below the eagle's eye. Another had the words, "Road is home," stitched across his back. Daniel counted more than 50, then 100. Then he stopped counting. They filled Main Street, lined every parking spot, curved around the gas station, blocked intersections. The hum of the town disappeared beneath the living roar of a family that didn't ask permission to love someone. Then the engines cut all at once. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. Doors creaked open. Boots hit pavement. And then they walked. Not rushed, not yelling, not looking for a fight. Just walking toward the diner. Toward her. The frontmost rider removed his helmet and tucked it beneath one arm. He had a snow-white beard, a weathered leather vest, and eyes that had seen decades of back roads. The patch on his chest read, "Marcus President Iron Wings MC." He approached the door and stopped just short, nodding at Raven. "Word travels fast," he said, voice like gravel softened by whiskey, especially when someone stands up for one of ours. Raven said nothing at first, her lips parted, her hands gripping the wheels of her chair. Then softly, "You came." Marcus nodded once. "You've shown up for us more times than I can count. When I heard what went down here, I figured we owed you a little breakfast." Raven let out a breath, half laugh, half release, as if she'd been holding it for years. Daniel stepped forward, uncertain. "I appreciate the support, but I'm not sure this place can feed 200 bikers." Marcus grinned. That's why we brought our own. He turned and gestured. From the line of bikes came carts and coolers, frozen meats, eggs, loaves of bread, crates of coffee, jugs of syrup, whole smoked hams wrapped in foil, a full truckload of supplies carried by gloved hands and quiet grins. One woman handed Alma a tray of cinnamon rolls still steaming from the road. Another handed Lily a bandana with cartoon wings drawn in pink Sharpie. Daniel looked around at the crowd now filling his parking lot. No anger, no weapons, just a wave of gratitude and loyalty so loud it didn't need words. Marcus turned back to Daniel and said, "You took a stand. We're just here to make sure it doesn't cost you everything." Raven finally spoke, voice hoarse. "I didn't ask for this. That's the point," Marcus said. He looked to the others and raised a hand. "We eat. We pay. We tip heavy. And we don't block the pie case." Laughter rolled through the crowd. Daniel looked at Raven. She looked at him. No words were spoken, but something old and broken in both of them shifted. Not fixed, not erased, but acknowledged. He stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Well," Daniel said, voice quiet, but firm, "let's eat." And just like that, Parker's diner came alive again. The sizzle of bacon met the thunder of laughter. The diner had never sounded like this before. Not during the 4th of July rush. Not during Caroline's chili cook-offs. Not even when the governor's motorcade stopped in during an election year. Parker's diner, once echoing with silence and judgment, now pulsed with something rare belonging. Boots scuffed tile floors as men and women hauled in crates of eggs and gallons of orange juice. Jackets with patches from Missouri, Utah, Tennessee, and South Dakota hung neatly along the wall like museum pieces. The jukebox, dusty from months of disuse, played a Johnny Cash track someone had paid for in quarters 6 times in a row. And every booth full. Daniel moved like a general in a kitchen too small for his army. Grease popped, pancakes flipped, a ham as big as a spare tire spun slowly on a hot plate. Alma barked orders with the precision of a drill sergeant, while one of the biker women, Mary Lou from Arkansas, who had 14 grandkids and a Harley named Rosie, dished out biscuits with a grin wide enough to catch the morning sun. Lily had long since abandoned her drawing table. She now sat at the corner booth with a makeshift crown fashioned out of diner napkins and a name tag that read, "Boss Lady courtesy of an older biker named Bear, who insisted every road queen deserved a title." Daniel paused long enough to look out over the room, not just at the food, but at the way it landed. At one table, a gray-haired man in a Vietnam vet cap shared quiet words with a young biker, whose hands shook just enough to suggest PTSD. At another, a woman in a wheelchair with pink wheel covers swapped stories with Raven, both of them laughing softly between sips of black coffee. And then there was Brennan, sitting in the farthest booth alone. No badge on display. No gun. No radio. Just a cup of coffee, and a silence so heavy it weighed the air around him. He hadn't said a word since walking in 30 minutes ago. He hadn't needed to. His face said enough. The shame, the reckoning, the quiet realization that the town hadn't turned on Daniel he had. And now, he was the outsider. Daniel watched him for a moment, then looked away. Across the counter, Marcus approached with 2 plates of food in hand, one stacked high with waffles, the other a mountain of bacon. "For the girl and her boss," he said, grinning. Daniel accepted the plates. "You always feed people like this?" Marcus shrugged. "When they feed us first." He glanced around the room. "You don't know what this means, do you?" Daniel frowned slightly. "Breakfast." Marcus chuckled, then leaned in. "You defended one of ours without knowing the weight of it. That means something. especially now in a world where most folks only stand up when it costs them nothing. Daniel set the plates down and wiped his hands on his apron. "I didn't do it for payback, I know Marcus said. That's why we showed up." A beat passed. Then Marcus added more quietly, "You ever think about what comes next? You got this diner. You got people who believe in you now. That ain't just survival, son. That's purpose." Daniel looked toward Lily, who was now giving a tattoo inspection to one of the bikers with a purple marker. "Used to think my purpose ended when I took off the uniform," Daniel said. "Then I thought it ended when Caroline passed. Now I'm not sure." Marcus nodded solemnly. "It never ends. It just changes shape." Across the room, Raven sat at her booth alone for the first time in an hour. Daniel took a plate of eggs and slid into the seat across from her. She looked up surprised. "Didn't think I'd get table service," she said. He smiled. "Only for customers with flame wing tattoos and fan clubs outside." Raven smirked, but her eyes were softer now. She looked lighter. The kind of light that comes when weight finally shifts, not vanishes, but redistributes in a way you can carry. "My mom's waking up more," she said suddenly. "The nurse called this morning. They think she'll pull through." Daniel's smile deepened. "That's good news." Raven nodded. "She always told me, there'll be a day when someone shows up for you, the way you've shown up for others." "I didn't think that would happen in a place like this." Daniel looked around. "Neither did I." She studied him, then said gently, "You could have stayed quiet. No one would have blamed you." He shook his head. "But I would have blamed me." Raven looked down at her plate. Then after a moment, "You ever think about doing more than this? The diner, I mean." He chuckled. "Like what, biker diplomacy?" She smiled. "I don't know. Something bigger. Something that gives other people the feeling you gave me." Daniel considered that. For the first time, he didn't dismiss the idea. Not because the diner wasn't enough, but because maybe now it could be more. Across the room, Brennan stood quietly, left a bill on the table, and turned to go. He paused by the door, looked back, and met Daniel's eyes. No nod, no apology. Just a glance that said, "I see now." Daniel didn't return it. Raven spoke softly. "Think he'll come around?" Daniel exhaled. "I think he already has. Doesn't mean I have to open the door today." She nodded. "You ready to head out tomorrow?" Daniel asked. "I think I might stay a little longer," she replied. And for the first time, she said it without hesitation. By late afternoon, the roar of engines had quieted. Some bikers lingered out front, swapping stories and tightening straps on saddlebags. Others had already hit the road, disappearing in 2s and 3s down the winding hills of Fairhaven. But the diner, now full of warm crumbs and coffee stains, felt somehow fuller, even as it emptied. Daniel stood at the back booth, clearing plates. His apron was smudged, his hands sore, but his face carried the quiet ease of a man who knew the weight of purpose. "Feels like after a funeral," Alma murmured beside him. Daniel looked up. "You mean the kind where people actually remember how to be alive?" She nodded. "Exactly that." Outside, Lily sat cross-legged on the hood of Marcus's truck, coloring in a fresh notebook someone had gifted her. The bandana around her neck flapped gently in the wind, pink with the words, "Iron Valkyrie Jr." scribbled across it in black marker. Inside, Raven wheeled herself to the booth nearest the jukebox. She didn't speak at first, just stared at the yellowing song labels behind the scratched glass. Patsy Cline, Roy Orbison, the Statler brothers. Daniel came up behind her. "She still works," he said. "You just have to jiggle the cord near the bottom." Raven cracked a faint smile. That always true, or just the magic touch of a Marine bit of both? She glanced at him, her smile fading into something gentler. "Thank you. For today." He shrugged. "You brought them." "No, she said softly. You did. I just gave them a reason. Daniel didn't argue. He knew the truth sat somewhere between their versions. They sat in silence for a while, watching the light shift across the floor tiles, the long golden stripes of late-day sun stretching like arms across the room. Then Raven reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a small folded photograph. She hesitated just long enough for Daniel to notice her fingers tremble. She passed it to him. The image was old, faded at the corners. It showed a boy and a girl, probably no older than 10, sitting side by side on the hood of a truck. Behind them, a trailer, a dog, and a man in uniform with his hand resting gently on both their heads. That's me and my brother, Raven said. And that's my dad. He died when we were young. My brother took it the hardest. Joined the Navy to honor him. Daniel studied the image. He looks proud. He was. She paused. Then he came home and didn't talk for 3 months. Daniel nodded slowly. What finally broke the silence? Me, she said. I rolled into his place on a bike I barely knew how to ride, parked it on his lawn, slammed the door open and screamed, either start talking, or I'm taking your dumb dog and your dumb guitar and riding until the damn ocean stops me. Daniel smiled. Did it work, sort of? He didn't say anything, just handed me the guitar and said, start learning. Her voice cracked barely. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time I saw him smile. She looked down at her lap. I lost him 6 months later. Not to the war, but to the silence. Daniel said nothing. He just sat there holding the photograph. After that, she continued, I stopped trying to belong. Found a group of people who didn't ask me to explain my grief. They just rode beside me. Didn't matter if I cried or cussed or broke down at rest stops. They just rode. And I kept riding. Her eyes lifted. And then, one day, I couldn't walk anymore. She gestured toward the chair. Car accident. Dumb storm. Dumb truck driver. He walked away without a scratch. Her voice went flat. But the riding didn't stop. They adapted. Bought me a van. Welded a wheelchair hitch. Carried me into every bar, every highway diner, every state line that looked like a fresh start. Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't expected her to share all of this. Not here. Not now. Not with the smell of bacon still lingering and Lily's humming echoing from the parking lot. But she wasn't just telling a story. She was handing him her truth. And he knew the weight of that kind of gift. Why'd you tell me this now? He asked gently. Raven took a breath. Because today reminded me of something I forgot for a long time. What's that? She looked at him, eyes steady, unblinking. That people still show up. The words sat in the air like morning frost, still cold, beautiful. Daniel folded the photo and handed it back. Raven slipped it into her jacket and wheeled backward a few inches. I should probably go pack up. He stood, stepped aside. But before she left, she turned again. My mom's awake. Fully. She asked for soup. Daniel blinked. Raven smiled a little more this time. Doctor said it's a miraculous improvement. Brain pressure's down. Motor response is stabilizing. Daniel exhaled quietly. Stunned. That's... I don't know what changed, Raven whispered. But maybe some things shift when you stop running and let the world hold you for a while. Daniel nodded, and then, as if on cue, the jukebox whirred and crackled to life. Neither of them had touched it. But somehow I Fall to Pieces began to play slow, lilting Patsy Cline in her full, trembling glory. They both laughed softly, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt broken. Just human. And healing. Together. The next morning the town was quiet. Not tense. Not bitter. Just uncertain. It was the kind of stillness that came after a heavy rain not quite washed clean, but waiting to see what might grow. Daniel stood behind the counter of Parker's diner, polishing the same coffee cup for the third time. The booths were empty again, but the silence felt different now. Less like abandonment, more like hesitation. Out front, the last of the bikers had rolled out just before dawn. Raven had wheeled herself out to hug them, each in turn, strong arms, broken voices, weathered leather, and whispered promises. "Call us if you need us," Marcus had said. "I won't need to," she replied. "You'll already know." And just like that, they were gone. But the air they left behind, it lingered, like something holy had passed through Fairhaven and left the doors open. Lily sat at the far booth, sipping orange juice from a straw and sketching her version of the diner, this time with wings. Not eagle wings, not biker flames, just soft pastel feathers lifting the roof skyward. Alma busied herself with the biscuit dough, her elbows floured her radio, humming softly with an old Emmylou Harris tune. "You think they'll come back?" she asked. Daniel didn't have to ask who they were. "Some will," he said. "Some won't." And Brennan. Daniel glanced toward the door. "He's got his own road to walk." The bell above the door jingled. They both turned. It was Mrs. Calhoun, a tiny woman with white curls and a cane wrapped in red yarn. She'd once called Raven trash, with wheels under her breath at the gas station. Now she stood at the entrance of the diner, like a schoolgirl unsure of her welcome. "Morning," Daniel said evenly. She took a cautious step forward. "I was hoping you still had that cinnamon oatmeal I like," she said. "But only if it's not too much trouble." Daniel nodded. "It's never too much trouble, Mrs. Calhoun." She made her way to her usual booth, the one she hadn't sat in for over a week. Alma passed Daniel with a sly smile. One down. 15 minutes later, Coach Danvers walked in, former high school football coach, a man who'd once said, "Real men don't cry over tattoos." He now stood at the counter like he'd never left his hat in his hands. "Can I get a burger?" he asked. "It's 9:30 in the morning," Daniel replied. Danvers grinned. "I figured I'd make up for lost time." Daniel chuckled and fired up the grill. And so it began. One by one, the town walked in. The quilting club ladies, the mailman, the grocery clerk with the thick glasses and the nervous smile, even the librarian who never spoke above a whisper. She came in asking for waffles. No one made grand apologies. No one offered speeches. But the act of returning was its own kind of confession. Raven rolled in around noon, a scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, her eyes still rimmed with the tired peace of someone learning to exhale again. She looked around, taking in the crowd, then wheeled up to the counter and said, "You keeping score?" Daniel smiled, just counting chairs. He poured her a cup of coffee and slid it toward her. "You see Brennan this morning?" she asked. Daniel nodded toward the back booth. Raven turned. There he was, in uniform, alone, quiet. But this time there was no tension in his shoulders. Just a man sitting with his palms flat on the table, a coffee in front of him, and a pair of eyes that finally looked like they'd seen the whole picture. He caught Raven's gaze and offered the faintest nod. She returned it. That was enough. Raven wheeled over to Lily's booth. The little girl held up her newest drawing. This time the diner had wheels. Motorcycle wheels. A dragon-riding shotgun. "You made the diner a bike," Raven said. Lily nodded. "So, it can go help people." Raven swallowed hard. "Mind if I ride with you?" Lily giggled. "You already are." Across the diner, Marcus's leather vest still hung on the coat hook. Daniel had left it there, unsure if he was supposed to return it or wear it. But when he'd tried to take it down that morning, Alma had stopped him. "Leave it," she said. "It belongs here now." Daniel looked around the room again, noticed how conversations overlapped gently, how strangers shared booths, how the jukebox kept playing without coins. The town hadn't changed overnight, but it had remembered itself. Or maybe it had been reminded of what it could still become. Raven wheeled up beside him at the counter. "So what now?" she asked. Daniel thought for a moment, then looked around, and answered, "Now we build something that lasts." The morning sun filtered through the front windows of Parker's diner in long golden stripes, turning the faded floor tiles into something almost holy. Daniel Brooks stood alone behind the counter, his hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, watching the light crawl slowly across the room, the same room that not long ago had felt like it was dying. Now it pulsed again. Not loud, not showy, but steady, alive. On the far wall above the booth, where Caroline had once doodled menu sketches and Lily had once napped after school, there hung a new frame, not centered, not polished, just right. Inside the wooden frame was an old biker vest, cracked leather patched with road dust, faded stitching spelling out, "Friends of the Angels Parker's Diner." Chapter: Established by kindness, protected by courage. Daniel hadn't put it there to impress anyone. He put it there because legacy needs a place to live. Underneath the vest, mounted on a smaller plaque, was a note handwritten in strong block letters to the man who stood still when the world told him to step aside, and to the child who reminded us all what bravery looks like when it wears pigtails. Marcus President Iron Wings, mate. The bell above the door jingled. Daniel looked up to see Raven wheeling in scarf, flapping behind her in the early spring breeze. She was no longer hunched, no longer wary. Her wheels rolled smoother now, not because the gravel had changed, but because she had. Behind her, Lily bounced through the doorway carrying 2 brown paper bags from the corner store. "Donuts," she called. "But I already ate the one with sprinkles." Daniel mock scowled. "That was my bribe to get through the breakfast shift." "Bribe expired," Lily replied, grinning. Raven chuckled and wheeled toward her usual booth, though everyone now called it Raven's Corner. She looked toward the framed vest and paused. She'd seen it before, of course they all had. But somehow, in that morning light, with the scent of biscuits baking and the laughter of a child nearby, it hit different. "You really hung it up," she murmured. Daniel stepped beside her, sipping his coffee. "I didn't hang it," he said. "We did." She looked at him, then back at the wall. "I still don't feel like I deserve it," she whispered. Daniel tilted his head. "You ever ride through a thunderstorm? Plenty. You stop and wait it out. Never." Daniel smiled. "Then you've earned it." Raven didn't respond. She didn't have to. Just then, Alma walked out from the kitchen holding a stack of menus with a new edition scribbled in red pen. "What's that?" Raven asked. Alma handed her one. At the bottom of the specials list, beneath buttermilk pancakes and biscuits and gravy, was a new line. "The Raven Strong Coffee No Judgment Extra Grace. Served warm no matter the weather." Raven blinked, then laughed. Alma winked. "Figured it was time we named something after someone who helped change this place." Raven cleared her throat. That's ridiculous." "Of course it is," Alma said. "So's living through half the hell you've seen. But you did that too." Lily climbed up beside Raven in the booth and handed her a crayon. Drawing this one showed the diner with a halo over it, a pair of wings on either side, and the words, "Kindness never rides alone." Raven touched the drawing with the tips of her fingers like it was more delicate than glass. And then she did something no one expected. She cried. Not loud, not messy, just the kind of tears that come from release. From knowing that the worst parts of your story didn't disqualify you, they just gave your name weight. Daniel sat across from her, watching. Not with pity, not with discomfort, just presence. After a moment, Raven wiped her eyes and said, "So, you think this place can really be something new?" Daniel nodded. It already is. She looked down. What if I stayed a while just to see where the road leads? Daniel smiled. Then I'll make sure the coffee stays hot. From the window, they could see Brennan walking by, no badge this time, just a man in jeans and a ball cap holding a dog leash. He paused when he saw the vest in the window, tipped his head slightly, then kept walking. Not out of guilt, just out of understanding. The door jingled again. This time, it was a young couple passing through town. They glanced around unsure until Daniel waved them in. Come on, he said. We've got space. They sat near the window, asked for menus, ordered the Raven. And when their food came, the woman looked at the wall and asked, Is that real? Raven leaned over and said, Every stitch. The woman smiled. I love that. And just like that, it became part of the town's lore, part of something that would outlive any one of them. That evening, as the sun slipped low and the shadows grew long, Daniel stood outside the diner, with Lily asleep on his shoulder and Raven beside him. The wind was calm, the road ahead was quiet, but not empty. He looked up at the glowing sign that Caroline's father had carved by hand decades earlier. Parker's Diner, all are welcome, all are fed, and beneath it someone had tacked a small wooden plaque, carved by hand, still fresh. Defended by one, remembered by all. Raven read it. Daniel hadn't seen it before, neither knew who placed it there, but neither spoke a word. Because some things, some legacies don't need names, just actions, and a wall to hang them on. Where are you watching from? We'd love to hear from you in the comments, whether you're tuning in from a small-town diner, a quiet porch, or halfway across the world. Your stories matter too. If this story touched you, and you believe the world needs more reminders of kindness, courage, and second chances, consider subscribing to Soul Moment Story. Every week, we share stories that honor the quiet heroes, the forgotten moments, and the gentle power of standing up for what's right. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until the next story, take care, be kind, and never underestimate the ripple of one small act.